Hi, this is Van Riper, the program manager here at Google for our Google developer groups worldwide. For those of you that don't know, we have more than 400 groups in over 100 countries to date, holding meetings on an average of upwards of 5 meetings a day. These segments are meant to share information with those groups and their organizers, but it's also for the general public. So welcome any of you that aren't currently members of our Google developer groups communities, but I hope you'll find a community in your area and join. Today, I'm very happy to have Bartholomew Furrow and Igor Naverniouk with me from the CodeJam team, 2 of the engineers. We're going to talk a little bit about how they got involved with CodeJam, the history of CodeJam, and answer some of your questions from the moderator. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Bart and Igor.
Thank you, Van. I'm Bartholomew Furrow. This is Igor Naverniouk. And I've been a software engineer at Google for around 6 years now. Before I came to Google, I got a couple of degrees in physics. I have a Bachelor's of Science in Physics at Queen's University and a Master's of Science in Physics at University of British Columbia. And the way I ended up down at Google is through competitive programming. There are a lot of different programming contests like Google CodeJam, and it's through getting involved in contests like that that I built my programming skills and ended up working here at Google. I got involved in programming contests in 2003, I suppose. When I was doing my bachelor's degree, I just sort of saw a sign one day that said there was a programming contest on Saturday in the math building, and because I'm the kind of guy who likes doing programming contests on Saturdays in math buildings, I thought, why not? And from there, I sort of parlayed my way onto my school's ACM team. We'll talk a bit about that. It's a different contest in a bit. And then started getting better at these contests and competed in the first Google CodeJam. And so after a long road of contests and competing, I made my way here. And now that I'm at Google, I work on the ads quality system. So we're the folks who, if you do a search on google.com, sometimes you'll see ads above or to the right or below the search results. We try to make them great. And I also have what's called a 20% project. 20% project is when Google engineers spend a fifth of their time working on a pet project or a passion project. And for me, that's Google CodeJam, which is what we're here to talk about today.
Okay, I'm Igor. So my history is I was doing computer science and math undergrad at the University of British Columbia. Back in 2001, I saw a poster that said free pizza and a programming competition. So both of those things I thought were interesting. So I showed up, and that's how I started on this whole path of programming competitions. That was a poster for the ACM programming competition, which is a team event for university students. And since 2001, I never stopped. So I've been competing in programming competitions for a while, and then I started coaching a team. And then now I'm working on CodeJam. So in 2006, I did an internship at Google in the summer. I thought that was pretty cool. And then, so the way I got into that is I actually did pretty well in a CodeJam competition that Google ran. That was, back then it wasn't run by Google itself. It was sponsored by Google and ran by a different company. And in 2007, I came back for another internship. Bartholomew was my host. And the project then was to build a platform for CodeJam at Google in-house so that we can do it our way. So I worked on that, and since then joined Google full-time and started working on CodeJam as my 20% project, similar to Bartholomew. My main project is Android. I work on all kinds of user analytics in Android and Google Play. And I spend some of my time, between 5 and 50% sometimes, on CodeJam. So that's my story.
And so for people who don't know a lot about competitive programming or CodeJam in particular, let's just sort of maybe give you a brief introduction. So for Google CodeJam, this isn't a hackathon. What we're doing is we're going to pose a bunch of puzzles to you. We pose between 3 and 5 programming problems, depending on the contest. And generally speaking, they're problems where there's some sort of puzzle that you're trying to solve. To give you an example, you can imagine that you have a chessboard and you want to put a bunch of queens on the chessboard so that none of the queens can attack each other. Some of you might have seen that problem when you were in high school. I remember seeing that in high school and trying to solve it by hand. But we could say, because we have computers, instead of an 8x8 chessboard with 8 queens, we could do an n-by-n chessboard with n queens. And we could ask you to write a program that, given n, prints out good locations for all of the queens. So that's just one example of the sort of problems that we might ask. And so a code jam round generally lasts a couple of hours, asks you a few of these questions, and whoever can get the most points off of solving our problems is the winner of the round. And in the code jam competition, we start off with the qualification round, have a few more online rounds where we gradually reduce the number of people competing. And this year we have our on-site finals in London, England. So the top 25 in the world will be flying to London to compete.
So how is code jam different from other programming competitions?
Well, it's better. Code jam is, I'd say that it's probably the biggest algorithmic programming competition in the world. So you go up against a lot of people, including some of the very best in the world. We work really hard to get our problems as great as possible. I'm sure everybody else does too, but I think we do a particularly good job. And you can compete in any programming language you like. So if you're a Ruby wizard or particularly good at PHP, you're not just stuck with C++ and Java, which some of the other contests make you be. You can use, any language you like. It could be something that you wrote at home, your own compiler, and you want to prove that your language really works. And this is a great place for that.
Yeah, we've had people compete in some really weird programming languages. There's one guy who's kind of infamous for trying to solve every problem in a different language, and he keeps choosing more and more obscure languages over the years. Some of the ones with funny names that I shouldn't be saying.
Last year he used Shakespeare, where you write what looks like a Shakespearean play,
right.
But you write it carefully, and it turns out to be code. And he actually solved a problem using that, which I was impressed by.
I think he's done lol code as well.
He's done lol code as well. Yeah.
So why should you care about code jam? So first of all, it's fun. Second of all, I can say personally, I've learned a lot of things from programming competitions. Probably even more practical things than I would have learned in classical studies in computer science. The cool thing about programming competitions in general is that you get a self-contained problem, and you have to solve it, and you have to be sure that you solved it. It's one thing to say, yeah, I know how to solve that. And it's another thing to sit down, write code that passes unit tests. There's a big gap between those two. And programming competitions really make you prove that you actually know how to solve the problem. Because if you solve 99 out of 100 cases and you have a bug somewhere, that's wrong. We give you no points for that, which is a little harsh, and some people find that kind of not very appealing.
Demoralizing.
Demoralizing, yeah, it's a good point.
But we want to make sure that you solve the problem exactly right. And so this is a great way to build strength as a programmer. I'd like to think that it sort of builds up your vocabulary. Once you can solve more problems with more and more ease, then suddenly the things that you come across at work, if tomorrow I came across at work an n-cube dynamic programming algorithm, I would just do it. I wouldn't think that that was a particularly difficult thing to come across, whereas before programming competitions that would have been, well, maybe I can find an approximation or a quicker way around it. But now, it's just an n-cube dynamic programming problem. You just solve it. So it really, I think it builds your ability to work from day to day, particularly if you use in CodeJam the programming language that you use at work. Another thing is that it's really good for job interviews. For people who interview in technical interviews, you'll often get asked a question of the sort that we ask in CodeJam. Solve this self-contained simple problem and then write code for it. And if you have been competing in CodeJam or other contests, then you're an expert at that. Then you really know how to do that. And you go into an interview and you can kind of blow away those algorithmic questions.
Yep. So on interviews, that's a really good point. There are some questions. So I interview a lot of people at Google. I think a lot of engineers do that. And there are some questions that sometimes I ask a candidate, and candidates who have done programming competitions before really get it immediately, and others struggle. Like, for example, I like to ask, So I ask a programming problem, and I like people to write code, and then I ask, how do you test this code? So some people with general programming experience can get that right. But then the next question is, so how big of an input can this code handle? And that usually really puzzles people. They say, well, I know this is linear time, so, and then they don't know what to say next. But somebody with programming experience, programming context experience, can immediately say, okay, so this is an algorithm that, let's say, finds blobs and images or something. And if you have this experience, you can say, okay, on images of size 1,000 by 1,000, this will work. On 1,000,000 by 1,000,000, this will definitely not work. This is really useful in day-to-day life as well. So if you're writing a piece of code, you have to have a really good understanding of what kinds of inputs it can handle and what kinds of situations it applies to. So it means understanding sort of a full stack from high-level concepts in programming languages to really down at the level of sort of machine code. How fast is this thing actually running? And programming competitions make you understand that whole range, because otherwise it's really easy to write some code and then try to solve a problem, and you find out that it's just going to run forever. So that's one of the examples.
Yeah, it gives you a lot of practice in that sort of.
And also gives you a lot of confidence that you actually get these things right. Because you may have an idea that, okay, maybe this is a fast algorithm, this is not a very fast algorithm. But if you can put concrete numbers on it, it gives you a lot of confidence to say, yeah, I actually know how to do this. If you give me this problem, I can go and solve this. And I don't just tell you how to solve it, I actually write code and we can test it out. So it makes things go a lot faster and smoother sort of in day-to-day work.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
So would you like to take a few of the questions from the moderator now?
Sure.
That's a great idea. I'll read out this first one. So why do you think some countries, like Russia, Japan, Poland, and China, have more top competitors than other countries? This also happens in other contests, like the ACM International Collegiate Programming Contest. What's missing from other countries?
I wouldn't say there's something missing from other countries. I think there are some things that these countries do well. First, it's a general, so I can speak about Russia because I know a bit about that. Sort of the general education system focuses a lot on math and science and sort of precise disciplines like that. A lot more so than schools in Canada or United States focus on that. That's not necessarily a good thing, but or correct way to do things, but it's definitely helping people get better at programming competitions and math competitions, competitions in general. Sort of the spirit of competition is nourished and encouraged. We had lots of different internal competitions in school back in Russia. So I think that's one thing that they do differently, not necessarily better, but it helps people get better at programming.
It works for a programming contest. Yeah. And they also take these things very seriously at the university level. The ACM ICPC is this team event, and teams represent universities. And so some universities take it seriously enough that I think in some of the Chinese universities, if you join the programming team, that's worth 2 credits for the semester. So instead of taking 2 classes, you take the Preparing for Programming Contest class. And I don't think that's the case in very many or maybe even any universities in North America. So I think that maybe the overall summary would be that in general, schools take programming contests very seriously, or much more seriously in these countries than they do in Canada and the United States. And I think the schools here don't really pay a whole lot of attention.
There's another thing I could say about that. So the questioner interestingly mentions Russia, Japan, Poland, and China. And if you know some history of programming competitions, Japan is actually very new on that list. If you look back maybe 5 years, it would have been Russia, Poland, and China. Japan was nowhere near the top of any scoreboard of any major programming competition, but then something changed. And I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I think what this says is that community has a huge effect. So once you have a few superstars from a country do really well in competitions, then they start growing this community of other competitors around them. And I've seen this happen in universities, and I've seen this happen in whole countries. So Japan is a great example. And now Japanese contestants do extremely well in CodeJam and TopCoder and other programming competitions.
That's right. We had if I'm not remembering correctly, in 2011 we had our world finals for CodeJam in Tokyo, and a Japanese competitor won the contest, which was a first for us, but I imagine not a last. So the next question is, how much do you think cognitive skills affect someone's peak performance? Are people's capacity in competitive programming limited to their natural or genetic intelligence, or can they get better training? For example, achieving a red color on Topcoder. Topcoder, by the way, is another programming contest. They're the company that Google went to in 2003 to run the first Code Jam before Igor and I and our cohorts took it over for Google in 2008. I would say that hard work is huge in this. I was recently having a conversation with Pachocki, who is possibly the best competitor in the world at programming contests. And I asked him, I needed a list of the contests that he participated in. And I've participated in Code Jam, ACM Programming Contest, and Topcoder. And those are essentially the ones that I've participated in. He sent me 30. At least. It may have been closer to 50. So he is someone who is at the top of the world because he works very hard. Now, he's brilliant. He's a very intelligent person, and there's no question that that plays a role. But he's passionate about it, and he works extremely hard, and that's why he's such a good contestant. Now, there are other, I'm sure that you can find examples in both directions for people who maybe don't consider themselves to be brilliant, but are very hard workers and have reached the upper echelons. And then you get people who are 14 and are among the best in the world. There's a Belarusian, I think, Gennady, go ahead.
Korotkevich.
Thank you.
Yes.
Who, at the age of 14, was winning programming contests, global programming contests. So it's there's definitely something to be said from both sides. But I think if that you are the kind of person who finds this interesting, you are almost certainly smart enough with enough hard work to hit the upper ends. Because even the people at the upper ends don't do this, and it's not their job, right? They do this as a hobby. They do this in the evenings. And so if you were really passionate about it, you could spend your evenings on it too, and you could get there.
Yeah, I'd say it's like anything else. Some people are naturally great at it or have some skills that make them naturally good. Some people work really hard and get better at it. The people who are the best are usually some kind of combination of both. They have some natural skill and they work really hard at it. That's how they become the best in the world. Yeah, I guess we can move on to the next one.
All right, so the next one, we've kind of answered the first part of the question, which is, does competitive programming help you in your everyday job, and how so? I talked a little bit about how it sort of increases your vocabulary of things that you had an easier time writing code for, and so it's sort of more natural to do more complicated tasks because the building blocks are bigger. The next part of the question is, do you imagine yourself in your current position, role, or company without ever having participated in this kind of competition? Igor, you want to start on this one?
Probably not. So I got my first internship at Google after competing in CodeJam and getting to the finals, and that's how I got to Google in the first place. In general, I think I would have a hard time passing interviews without having done lots of programming competitions. When I was interviewing at Google, pretty much every question they asked me that I had to write code for, I've seen before. And I told them that. It's like, all right, yeah, I've seen that. Here's how you write the code. And they asked me the next question. It's like, oh yeah, I've seen that before in the contest. Here's how you write the code. And then the interviewers ran out of questions. So
that's good.
That's what you want to happen. So maybe there was some other way I could have ended up here, but I don't really see it. It certainly was a lot easier having had that experience. I don't know, maybe easier is not the word, because I spent a lot of time in programming competitions solving thousands of problems on websites. That was fun, but it also had this wonderful benefit.
Yeah, and I think, oh shoot, I was going to say something about what you just said, but I've forgotten.
Well, your story is similar to that.
I'll talk about my own experience. So, as I mentioned before, I have degrees in physics. I took a couple of courses in computer science when I was an undergrad, and I thought, oh, this is really neat. You know, I kind of like writing programs, if only there were actually something I wanted to do. If only there were a problem that I wanted to solve. And then I discovered these programming competitions, and then all of a sudden there were thousands of problems that I wanted to solve. Just look one up, write out the code for it, and solve it. So to me, that's very, very enticing and exciting, and that's what really got me past the stage of just being a little bit interested in computer science, and to the point where I was sort of seriously considering it as a career. I've remembered what I wanted to say about your point, Igor. By no means is competitive programming the only way to get good at Google interviews. If you're the kind of person who works on a lot of open source projects, or you're a professional coder, then chances are you've done quite a lot of coding, and you've done quite a lot of thinking about some of the kinds of problems that Google interviewers are likely to ask you. On the other hand, I think that for interviews in particular, I think competitive programming is particularly good. But for day-to-day work, there's a big old layer on top of that makes it more than exclusively what we do in programming contests. I mentioned that programming contests are how I got involved in computer science, but it actually goes a little bit deeper than that. So in 2003, I competed in the first Code Jam, and I wasn't actually good enough to make it to the finals, but I got lucky. So I made my way into the finals by a little bit of a fluke. And one of the things I discovered is that I really loved hanging out with the people who do programming contests. There's some really interesting people, and coming from a physics background, I love those people too. But these competitive programmers, they loved board games and card games. They loved logic puzzles. They loved thinking about algorithms. It was just, I finally found my people. And then I thought, oh, well, maybe Google would be a nice place to work if there are people like that around here. And so that's how I ended up applying for an internship. And then after that, I did another internship. And then after that, I came here full time. But in addition to that, I can also credit Code Jam and, well, not just Code Jam, but other programming contests for a lot more than that. Because in 2004, I went to the finals of the ACM International Collegiate Programming Contest and in Prague. And I met the other Canadian competitors there, of whom Igor was actually one. And Igor would be my teammate in the next year. But I also met a competitor from the University of Calgary whom I would later end up marrying. So this competitive programming has had a really big impact on my life.
So which question are we on?
Zach Baker here.
Are there any online courses for competitive programming, and have you considered creating or contributing to a new one? I don't know of any online courses per se, but there are a few things that you can do online. Actually, lots of things you can do online to get better at programming competitions. You can look at past contests. Lots of them are online. You can try to solve problems from past contests. There are plenty of blogs and different websites devoted to ranking problems by difficulty and making sure you can find problems that you're interested in. If you are really interested in graph algorithms, I would say one way to get better at it is to read a book on graph algorithms. Another way is to solve a bunch of graph problems in programming competitions, and there are websites that let you find those. When I was an undergrad at University of British Columbia, I actually taught a course on programming competitions because there are so many interesting problems that you see there, and so many different algorithmic techniques that you can use to solve problems that you don't really learn about in algorithms courses. For example, there are a bunch of ways to solve problems using brute force that are smarter than just dumb brute force. And sometimes, actually, in real life, you run into problems that are NP-hard. And if you just have a theoretical background about NP-hard problems, you can sort of say, well, we can give up, or we can try to find some approximation, maybe. But yeah, this is a hard problem. Nobody knows how to solve it. Another way to do that is to say, well, what is the best known algorithm? Or what are some tricks that we can use to actually go and solve this problem that everybody thinks is impossible to solve? And there are a bunch of these tricks that you learn about in programming competitions.
Not that they make a polynomial mind, but you can often cut n in half effectively for the purposes of solving the problem.
So yeah, there are plenty of online courses. Just look, topcoder.com is a great place to start. Yeah, the Code Jam website is actually not a bad place to start either. We have lots of rounds that we post online, our past rounds, including all the problems, and you can even download solutions of anybody who's solved this problem before. If you start with the earlier rounds in a tournament, you'll see easier problems. If you move to the finals, you see really hard problems.
That's right.
Find your place.
And because we haven't plugged the website yet, code.google.com/codejam. So if you go to the CodeJam website, you'll also see that we have registration open for CodeJam 2013, which is the contest where the finals are in London. And this is, I think, a really great opportunity for people to just try this out in a competitive environment. And it really gives you an opportunity to see how great some people are at it, and to measure your own skill at it as well. And as we mentioned for the earlier contest, it only gets better with time and with practice.
What was the first coding oh, you want to say something?
No, go ahead. Go.
Next question. What was the first coding competition you participated in? What languages did you use, and what point did you know you'd be addicted to coding competitions?
Oh, you know us so well, but don't. I first participated in an internal contest at the University of, at Queen's University, and then moved from there to the ACM ICPC, then to CodeJam, then to TopCoder.
Yeah, my story is really similar. ACM was the first programming competition because I found out about competitions at university, and that's the biggest university competition out there. A few of the top people that I know found out earlier. So there are high school programming competitions as well. I was nowhere near good enough in high school in programming to be able to compete in any kind of level. So, yeah, I guess it's a similar story to yours.
Now, at what point did you know you'd be addicted to coding competitions?
I'm not sure I'm addicted to programming competitions.
You can stop anytime you want.
Exactly. I can stop anytime I want. That's right.
Well, I don't know. I would say I really got hooked when after I'd done a couple of rounds and I thought, oh wow, this is good stuff, and then I really started buckling down. Now Igor, who says that he's not addicted, has solved literally thousands of problems online. But there's a website that posts hundreds of problems, and Igor is well over the 1,000 mark. So don't take him too seriously when he says he's not an addict.
I'd say you get addicted to things in a good way, at least. This is a good thing to get addicted to.
A good thing, yes.
Either when you get good at it, or you can see yourself improving, that's really addictive. Mm-hmm. Or when you can find somebody to compete with, and that was my example. So one of my friends at school was trying to solve more problems than me, and we were head to head, and we spent a whole summer sort of trying to race each other on the scoreboard of that website. And then that continued for a couple of years and got way out of hand. So since then, we both stopped, and then he was still a few places ahead of me, and then like 6 months later I went in and solved a few problems to get ahead of him. He still doesn't know. We'll
so
see.
what happened to that friend of yours?
He works at a hedge fund in New York, doing some other really interesting, solving interesting programming problems in that world. I haven't seen him compete in competitions in a while.
But we actually, a lot of our friends from university have ended up at Google. Particularly the University of British Columbia crowd. Igor and I were in the same team one year. Our teammate is at Google. Lots of the people from subsequent years' teams also have come here. Yeah,
Google has been pretty good at hiring a lot of the top talent from programming competitions. There's a country ranking on Topcoder where you can see which country is doing better than another country by sort of averaging in a smart way the competitors from that country. And somebody built kind of a country ranking for Google, if Google were a country, and it's way above any other country on Topcoder. So that's
I think we're pretty close to Russia, actually. I think Russia's in the lead, and we're pretty close. No?
Seriously? No, the last time I checked, we were like, it's not even comparable.
Okay, fair enough. Well, the best competitive programmer at Google is also Russian, so maybe that says something about it.
All right.
About us as a group.
So what's the next one?
Yes.
How can programming competitions learn from example of marathon running, where events provide both a highly competitive race for elites, yet also a broader audience and environment for personal challenge?
Well, I think that the earlier rounds really are an environment for personal challenge. Like our qualification round, it's effectively time unlimited. It's a 25-hour round, so you can essentially go in anytime you want. If it takes you 3 hours to solve the easiest problem, then that's fine. And so that's an opportunity for personal challenge. But also contests like Topcoder have their Division 2, which is for newer competitors, some slightly easier problems. And for students anyway, they can go to their, likely most students have a school with a programming team, ACM programming team, and there would probably be some people with similar skill level to measure themselves against, excuse me.
Yeah, I think we definitely have both of these qualities. There is a really competitive race at the top for the top spots in any worldwide competition. And there's also a ton of people who just do this in their free time without even participating in competitions. There are these websites with thousands of problems in them. You can go and solve as many problems as you want in your free time. And there are some people who are hardcore competitors. They always they compete in any competition that's out there. They try to get the top spot. And there are some people who have solved thousands of problems and have never really competed in real-time competitions, but they're at the top of every scoreboard on these websites. So there are two kinds of people that I know of, and sometimes it's the same person, but sometimes there are groups of people who never compete real time because it's a lot of time pressure and stress. But you can take your time and spend a few hours on the problem in the evening and do this for years and years. And people who enjoy doing that do that.
And if you go to the CodeJam website, that's code.google.com/codejam, then what you'll find is that if you look at the qualification round, that's the first round of the contest in 2012, there were around 20,000 people who participated. Now, there aren't 20,000 people in the world who are great at this. And there are a lot of people who, for them, that was their first programming contest. And some of the people for whom it was their first programming contest struggled, and some of them found that actually they were quite good at it. And given that we're speaking to an audience of developers, I hope, then I think we'll find that a lot of you are actually in the second category, off to a very good start. Our next question is EONOE asks if we have any regular contests like Topcoder's single round matches that people can use to prepare for CodeJam.
So we don't run that many rounds or that many contests during the year. There are some websites like Topcoder, like Codeforces and CodeChef and all these other. There are more of those every day, I think, or at least every year. There's no shortage of competition to practice on. Sorry. And you can also just spend free time solving problems, trying to rerun past competitions and see how you would have done by imposing a time limit on yourself. You can go to, for example, a CodeJam contest. You know how long it was. You can set aside that much time. You can try to solve the problems by not looking at them beforehand, and you see where you would have ended up on the scoreboard. Our scoring and penalty algorithms are pretty simple, so you can easily figure out where you would have ended up. So you can do it that way.
But I mean, to be honest, I mean the sorts of skills that you build by solving CodeJam problems, the sorts of skills that you need to solve CodeJam problems, are pretty similar to the sorts of skills that you need to solve Topcoder problems, or the sorts of skills you build by solving Topcoder problems. So go do Topcoder rounds. That would be a great way of preparing for CodeJam. That would be fantastic. For those of you who are watching us live, I'd like to remind you that we have a moderator page with a bunch of questions, and it's short enough right now that if you were to post some more questions of your own, then chances are pretty good that we'll get to them. So if you've got any questions for Igor Naverniouk or for me, then please log on and go ahead and ask them. The next question asks, what do you think if the CodeJam format were changed to something like the ACM-ICPC? For example, in the ACM-ICPC, there are these regional contests where different schools compete against each other. He's proposing super regional CodeJams, and then the people from the regionals would qualify for finals and go to the on-site finals. We actually did that in 2008, the sort of big year that we first reintroduced CodeJam, and that was a lot of fun. We haven't done it again recently, but it's definitely not out of the question that we could do it again. I don't know if it did. The end of the question is, could that encourage more people to participate? I'm not sure if it encouraged more people to participate.
Not enough to justify the amount of effort that went into running these lots of regional competitions. That was hard to do.
That was really hard to do.
But
it was fun.
Yeah, it means having to create a lot more problems, and which is where most of our time is spent. It's also not easy to organize that many different sites, and trying to do it at the same time is challenging across different time zones. So there's a price to pay for doing this. We did get a bump in registration. I think we had more. We definitely had way more registrants than the year before. Mm-hmm. We can think about doing this again, maybe.
Yeah, we won't rule it out for the future. Maybe sometime. But
could I interject a personal question?
Sure.
You talked about like more problems. I mean, how do you guys come up with the problems? Given there's it's been going for 10 years now, and there's I mean, coming up with new problems must be a challenge.
That is a challenge. So we're blessed here at Google with a very large number of programming contest competitors who are just really, they have a lot of experience and they have great imaginations. And so what we end up having is essentially this big brainstorming thing where we've got an internal website and people post their ideas to it. And some of the ideas are fully fledged programming problems, and others are the sort of thing that you need to think about a little more. I pretty regularly have lunch with David Arthur, who's another programming contestant and problem setter, and we'll just talk through a problem that's sort of a half-formed idea in one of our heads, and eventually it'll end up on CodeJam a lot of the time. So look for one of those on the finals this year. I think it's problem B. I'm not sure. But for me, when I'm coming up with problems, I kind of, in my day-to-day life, I'll come across something. There's a problem I think from 2011 called Candy Store that asks about a guy needing to stock up his store in order to sell candy. And I actually came across this when I was trying to figure out if I wanted to be able to lift weights with 2 hands, I wanted to be able to select any amount of weight up to 12 pounds in both hands, then what weights would I need to do it? So you could do like two 1-pound weights, two 2-pound weights, two 4-pound weights, two 8-pound weights, but that's actually not the most efficient thing you can do. You can do instead like two 1-pound weights, one 2-pound weight and a 3-pound weight or something like that. I can't do the greedy algorithm in my head, but for me, I come across these situations in day-to-day life, and then I write problems about them.
Yeah, I've written quite a few problems, and I'd say they fall into one of two categories. Sort of how do you describe where inspiration comes from? Nobody knows. Some of those are kind of similar to what Bartholomew was describing. You run into a situation in regular life where you say, well, this could be done better, or I wonder if I can turn this into a sort of a more well-defined problem. And you come up with a little story around it, and hopefully there's some interesting algorithm that could solve it. That actually happens pretty frequently. Another way, especially back when I was at university reading a bunch of papers for research, you run into some algorithm in a paper, and you say, well, that's an interesting and obscure algorithm. How do I make that useful? How do I actually turn it into a story where you can use this algorithm to solve some interesting problem? And that's an interesting exercise to do in science in general. But yeah, how does a writer come up with an idea for a short story? Who knows?
From anywhere. So Igor described, there's essentially two approaches. One is to have a situation and then come up with an algorithm to solve it, and the other is you have an algorithm and go looking for a situation.
Yeah.
And different people approach it in different ways.
Great.
Okay, so the next question here is, I think these have changed in order. What do you think is of higher importance, practicing or reading books on algorithms? How can you practice unless you know what's the right way to do it? I think that's a really great question, actually. For me, I like to have the motivation to solve a problem before learning the method to solve it. To read an algorithm in a book is one thing, but then if I don't have a problem that I want to solve, it's not quite as interesting to me. Contests like CodeJam and Topcoder, after the matches are over, will typically write an editorial. So if you go to the CodeJam website and you come across this problem and you have no idea how to solve it, and you think about it for a while and you decide, you know what, I just don't know how to do this, you can go to the contest analysis page, which is just a link on the same page as the problem was, and you just read how to do it. And we try to write out a clear explanation, and if you can't understand our super clear explanation, because occasionally they're not entirely clear, you could go to our Google Plus community and ask for help, or go to our mailing list and ask for help. And people are happy to help you out, as long as you mention the problem name, which some people forget to. So for me, I really love the approach of find the problem first and then find out how to solve it. But different people learn in different ways, and I can totally imagine that, supposing you read about dynamic programming in a book, then you could search the web for dynamic programming problems. And I don't think we have categorizations like that for CodeJam. There's no list of dynamic programming problems for CodeJam, but maybe we should make that.
Somebody can make that if they want to.
Maybe somebody else should make that. We're busy.
I get lots of email actually from contestants around the world asking me the same question over and over again. So how do I get better? My answer is usually, and they actually ask this exact question, do I read more books or do I practice more problem solving? And my answer is usually do what's more fun, because if it's not fun, you're not going to be doing it. If you like solving problems, if you like this gratification of actually submitting a solution and saying it's correct and seeing the correct response come back, then do more of that. If you like learning more algorithms from books, read more books. It's unlikely that you're going to reach some limit on the book reading where you're not going to get any better by reading more books. And it's also unlikely that you're going to reach some limit of problem solving where just solving more problems is not going to get you better. So do whatever is more fun. And better yet, find a friend who also likes doing this and do it together.
Yeah, solid advice. For people who are looking for resources on learning these things, if you go to our website, code.google.com/codejam, there's a link that says practice and learn. And on that link, you click that and you get a whole page full of resources. We've got a list of the easiest CodeJam problems to get started with. And we've also got a list of all the old CodeJam competitions. And we also list other websites that you can go to, like Topcoder, like the Sphere Online Judge, and other opportunities for you to solve problems and learn.
What about some team challenges? for one of the coming code jams, where universities could win Google Developer Boot Camps or something like that.
There's an idea.
We thought about that.
We've thought about team contests before, haven't we?
Yep. It may happen. Not this year. We're still deciding the best way to do that. Team competitions have an interesting dynamic to them. ACM ICPC is the most well-known team competition out there. So Bartholomew and I were on the same team competing in that. You get to run into some interesting challenges there. For example, you only get one computer for 3 people. So you have to optimize. Yeah,
that's an ACM though, which probably wouldn't be the case for Code Jam.
Sure, but I'm just saying that they come with different challenges, which are also interesting. It would be really difficult to mix team competitions with individual ones, so we would have to come up with something separate. So I've been thinking about it for a few years, but I haven't come up with any concrete idea that we could do.
Yeah, in some ways,
differently.
Team competitions are fundamentally unfair, because if you know somebody who's good, then you'll have a better team than somebody who only knows bad people.
Well,
not to be pejorative, but people who someone who only knows people who aren't as skilled. And so, I don't know. We're a little less enthusiastic about it for that reason as well, because you kind of want everyone to be on an equal footing to some extent.
I don't know. I've seen the situation in ACM where you have 3 excellent people.
Who can't work together.
I've been coaching the team for a while. So I coached for a few years at the University of British Columbia in Toronto. And we run an internal competition to figure out who are the best individual programmers. And then it's my job to put together some teams for the regional competition. And sometimes you run into a situation where you take the 3 best individual coders and you put them together on a team, and just disaster. They can't work together. They start fighting over things. So there's some interesting questions there too. So just because you know the best people doesn't mean you can make the best team, like in any other sport.
That's a good point. Though, to be fair, ACM requires particular team challenges of the challenge of sharing one computer.
There's one,
we did Code Jam, maybe you don't really need, you just divvy up the problems and then go do your own thing. So we lose some of the dynamic there, which is also
true.
But we're thinking about it. All right, let's see. Is there anything else on here? Boy, these keep jumping around. So, what about some team challenges? He asked again. Does the winner of Code Jam get a job offer at Google, as the registration page asks in which Google office you want to work for? No. We definitely consider excellent performance on Code Jam or any other programming contest when we're thinking about who to hire. But we also ask, when you register for Code Jam, are you interested in a job at Google? And if so, what office would you want to work at? And then that's, if the answer is yes, then we might contact you whether you do well or not. But no, it's definitely not a prize for the contest to get a job at Google.
Yeah, we have done some things in the past to make this easier for people. So if you can sign up if you're interested in a job. We'll send you an email, especially if you do well. Another is typically to get a job at Google, you go through 2 stages of interviews. There are phone screens and there are on-site interviews. And for finalists, in the past couple of years, we've let them essentially skip phone screens. So we may consider doing that again.
And it's on a person-by-person basis, right? It's not because they're, they didn't get that because they were a finalist. They got that because they're good.
But generally, I would say it's not the way. If you really want to get a job at Google and you want to use programming competitions to get that, it's not that this is going to be a prize for winning a competition. It's just that from getting better at competitions, you're going to get so much better at interviews that you'll get the job anyway.
And not just interviews, but also at writing code.
Well, at writing code too, yes. So hopefully there's some correlation between interviews.
We hope so. We sure hope so. All right. Okay, this is kind of an inside baseball question, so apologies to people who aren't Code Jam aficionados. Last year in the qualification round, we had one easy problem for 15 points, and you needed 20 points to qualify. Do we have the same type of thing going on this year? We're not going to tell you. What this person is asking about is in the qualification round, because it's not really timed. You've got 25 hours and you can compete whenever. You just need a certain number of points to advance to the next round. And we made it so in previous years we've typically made it so that fully solving one problem is enough. Last year we made it so there was one problem that if you fully solved it, you didn't get on to the next round. We might do that this year. We might not.
I think this one is slightly similar to the previous question. What's the motivation behind the problems in Code Jam? Does Code Jam ever post problems Google engineers work on? I know I've done that a couple of times. I've run into some algorithmic challenges in my day-to-day work, and I've sort of isolated the interesting part of that problem. wrote some story around it and made it into a programming contest problem.
Though to be clear, I mean, unfortunately, we can't make you do our work for us because we have to be able to tell if you solved it right. So we have to solve it correctly ourselves first.
Right.
As much as I would like to have 30,000 people doing my job for me, it doesn't work like that, sadly.
And there are some kinds of problems we get to do to solve at work that we can't ask in a programming competition, just because of the kinds of tools we get to play with. It's hard to write a programming problem where we say, well, what if you had 1,000 computers, and how can you solve it then?
1,000 computers and MapReduce architecture, and
we get to do that at work. We can't really turn that into a programming contest problem yet, although we can think about that.
We can think about that. But I guess that's, to throw in a brief plug for working at Google, that's one of the ways in which working at Google is different from programming contests, is that you get sort of cooler toys to play with in a way. You can you throw a lot of computers at a problem. And there are a lot of really interesting algorithmic questions that come up when you've got 1,000 computers instead of one. All right, our next question here comes from JPJ in Atlanta, Georgia. What is your favorite language to use in competitions? Which language do you recommend people to use for CodeJam? Igor.
My favorite programming language to use in competitions is C++, because I know it best. I know it better than most other languages. And it's short to write, and it has all the tools that I need for programming contests. That's my personal view. There are lots of people who use all sorts of other programming languages. Although, it depends on the problem. There are some problems where you need big integer arithmetic, which is kind of painful in C++, so you may want to use Python. There are some problems where you may want to create a bunch of threads, and because that's going to simplify some computation, maybe Java is the way to go, or Go, or something.
Go,
choose the right tool for the job, and learn one at least really well, and probably a few. That's better.
When I started competing, I competed in Java because that's the only language I knew. But then I learned C++ and I started using that because it was a little more succinct. And then after that, actually to work on CodeJam, because the CodeJam platform is written in Python, I learned Python. And there are certain problems that I'd rather solve in Python than in C++. So when I compete, I use either Python or C++ to solve problems. Let's see. Here at my university, people don't get very interested in competitive programming because they usually get frustrated when they fail to solve problems, which is very common for everyone at the start. How could I change that? Well, Petr, I don't know if you're a coach or a student or what, but typically the best way to get people not frustrated by problems that they can't solve is to give them easy problems. That's how you get people into it. You give them problems that they can solve. And so if you're running contests, then come up with simple problems to solve them. If you look at our qualification rounds for CodeJam, that's the round when anybody in the world can get into this round and start trying to solve problems. We want it so that anyone who tries to participate can solve something. And so our first problem will typically be something that's fairly not too algorithmically complex and not too hard to implement. So those are the two dimensions that you have to be careful about: algorithmic complexity and difficulty to figure out the solution, and difficulty to implement the solution. So you might consider coming up with problems that are easy in both, or maybe you are just so much better at one than the other that it's harder to see. But if run your problems by friends who are actually into competitive programming and see just how easy you can make the first couple of questions on your contest and hook them in that way.
There are lots of signals you can use to figure out how hard a problem is before you start solving it. For example, in CodeJam, we give point values to problems. So easier problems usually get fewer points, harder ones get more points. To the best of our knowledge, sometimes we mess that up. We also have several parts to a problem. Usually there's one problem statement, but there are several different input files with different limits on them. So you can solve the small ones, which is easier. Maybe you have lots of different algorithms you can use there, and there's a hard one that requires a more complicated algorithm. So start with the easy ones and find that line. Solve easy problems and get to harder problems until you can't solve them anymore, and then figure out how to solve those. Topcoder does it differently. Topcoder has two divisions. You have Division 1 and Division 2. You start in Division 2, and when you get good enough to start winning in Division 2, you get moved up to Division 1. So different competitions do it differently. If you have, if you're trying to figure it out during a competition, if you're in a live round, see what other people have solved. Or on some website where you're getting these problems, see how many other people have solved the problem, and start with the ones that have lots of solutions. Don't just randomly pick a problem. That's very frustrating.
Very frustrating. I think we're about to run out of time here.
Yeah, that might actually be a good segue for me to just mention. I want to encourage everyone to consider participating in Google Code Jam 2013. First round starts April 12th.
Yep.
And I also want to say that, independent of Code Jam, I think, especially for chapters, this is the Google Developer Group session here, especially for you organizers out there of smaller chapters, I think taking programming problems and letting everyone in the group go off and work at them and then come back and have someone that had a good solution share it and discuss it would be a great way for some of the smaller groups to kind of, do some programming activity as a group. And so I want to encourage you, whether you get involved in Code Jam or not, which I do encourage you to do, think about incorporating this in your activities as a local developer group, because the reason I got into this is I liked hanging out with other programmers and and solving problems. So that's why I loved having you guys on today. So I really appreciate your time, and I hope some of our audience are inspired to go forward and join Code Jam 2013.
All right.
Thanks
very much, man.